Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Danger of Silence. On our podcast today, we are going to be talking about a wonderful topic, which is social anxiety. So I am Devon Gross, and I am the Special Projects and Data Specialist here. And with me,
I am Hannah Woodman, and I'm the Helpline Coordinator here at NAMI, Maine.
so I'm very excited. This is something that I have personally been going on a journey with working on my social anxiety. So I wanted to see, I know it's a very common thing right now, something we will talk about, but especially after the pandemic and a lot of time alone and coming out of winter as well. There's been just, a lot of, it can be a lot going on and really hard for a lot of people. And I know it definitely affected me. And I want to, we wanted to make sure that we could give some advice and talk to it for other people who might be going through the same thing.
Yeah, I also thought it was interesting just to start. I think a lot of times, if you don't experience social anxiety, you can really conflate it with the idea of being shy or experiencing shyness. And it's really important to create that distinction. So I saw a lot of different ways that people describe this distinction, but one of my favorite ways actually says that basically with social anxiety disorder, every time you experience social interactions, you'll have the continuous level of stress or it could worsen. With shyness, as you become more comfortable, those symptoms release and you feel confident and comfortable in that space. So shyness is usually a temporary situation that you get in, and then once you're kind of accepted, distracted, feeling comfortable, most of the time those symptoms go away and they don't persist, and then they don't persist moving forward. So say maybe you join a bowling league. Maybe the first few times, if you're shy, you would feel really uncomfortable. And then after that, it would become regular and you wouldn't have a fear. For someone with social anxiety disorder, every single time they go, they would still have that fear. And I just thought that was really interesting because I think a lot of times, for me at least, like I always presume that with social anxiety, so like when people describe those symptoms to me, that kind of the same things that would alleviate shyness would support somebody with social anxiety disorder. And that's not necessarily true. It's very different. So I just wanted to start off with that to break the ice, be like, this is not just being shy.
That's such a good distinction. I think that over the last, I don't know how long, but that distinction has become more and more clear for a lot of people. And realizing too, not that shyness is something you can just get over, but a lot of people will just say, stop being shy, stop, just get over it, just deal with it. And knowing that with social anxiety, it is such a stronger thing that it does require a lot more of that treatment for it, and a lot more of, it's not just something you can just get over. You can get through it and you can work through it, but it is a true anxiety disorder, and it needs to be treated just like any anxiety does. So I did definitely, love seeing about that distinction, and really just, I think it affirms for a lot of people as well that it is something that is more severe. Of course, shyness can affect someone as well too. But just knowing that there is something, I for me at least, I find that if I know being able to label something and know what it is, and not everyone likes labels, but for me, I think it really helps, because then I can say, okay, there is, as we can talk about, there's a lot of things I can do for it. This is what this is, and here's how I can work through it and how I can help it. And I really found it interesting to kind of look at the symptoms as well of social anxiety, and kind of discuss a little bit of my experience and things. So in order to prepare for this, it's since social anxiety is something I'm working really hard on in my professional environment, my personal environment with my therapist, Mia.
Shout out to Mia.
Shout
What's
out to
up,
Mia.
girl?
You're the best. If you want to learn more about her, we have a therapy podcast. So I have been working a lot with it. So I really wanted to kind of having this podcast in the forefront and knowing it was going to happen really kind of pushed me to be like, hey, I have to do this so I can talk about it and really help others and see what I did. But for the intense worry before, during, and after a social situation is something that it's a big psychological symptom. And that's something I've experienced is it's not just like, yes, the before is really hard. And then during is really hard. But then after too is I found that when I was doing research and I was listening to a lot of stuff and is that a lot of the social anxiety the most difficult part is the after part because before the before part you're going to worry, but then it will change once it's happening. And then the after, there isn't really an end point to the worrying. It could keep going on for a long time. So something that I have done personally, and I listened to on a podcast, and I can definitely find the link to that podcast. It's from the completely blanking on the name. I will make sure to put it in.
We'll put it in the show notes.
It's a wonderful podcast all about social anxiety, and it's a psychologist who had social anxiety himself, and then he worked through it, and then he now talks to other people about social anxiety and how to get over it. But I think it's really interesting because it's done by someone who's not just professionally trained, but also has experienced it themselves. Yeah. And so one thing that I do to help is actually a meditation technique, but it really seemed to work, is if I'm thinking about worrying about a social interaction that happened in the past, I will hit my leg on the left side to kind of like jolt me up and like remind myself, okay, this is something that happened in the past. This is not a present thing that I need to worry about. It happened in the past. It's over with. It's done with. And then if I'm worrying about something in the future, I'll do the same thing on the right leg. Is I'll hit my right leg and I'll say, okay, this is something that's happening in the future. I don't know what's going to happen. I have no idea what's going to happen. I am not in that situation. And the biggest thing is just knowing like I will figure it out when I get there. And just really having that awareness, and it doesn't have to be that specific, but really just having something to snap yourself out of the moment and realize, what happened in the past happened in the past. Sometimes you can take some lessons from it. What I try to do after a social situation is take a lesson out of it if I need to and then move on. Not much easier said than done. But really I found that worrying about the past and a situation that already happened is the most intense worry for my social anxiety. So I feel like it's good to be aware of what part of it is really hard for you and what's the biggest part that seems to be really affecting you when it comes to social anxiety.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting. So I am a shy person, but I don't usually, aside from performing, like acting, I get very nervous when I have to act. And usually the blur of just remembering your lines, you just blah, blah, blah. But I'll have regrets after a performance. I wasn't good enough and think about that. But I didn't think about this. I thought it was really interesting was just the idea that social phobia can come in many different forms and be really selective to the person. So I think sometimes we tend to discount the severity of someone's reactions and feelings because we don't see them in every single way. So let's say somebody always eats lunch alone. And you're like, why can't you just eat lunch with me? What's the problem? They're like, I actually have a lot of anxiety around doing that. They have social anxiety around that moment, that vulnerable moment. Which I was like, that's such an interesting thing to know. But since in the rest of their daily life, they might not show other symptoms, people can really downplay, well, maybe they're making something up. It's like, no, these can be very specific. It might be that somebody, for the most part, doesn't feel social anxiety, but being on the phone causes great anxiety, or being around strangers
relate.
performing. You know, like, or even like things like I think this is coming back into play more now. When I was growing up, I know people who really, really going to the mall was very overwhelming and stressful. Now I love going to the mall because it's so interesting and fun. And I'm like, this shouldn't exist anymore, right? Like, I thought that this stopped like 10 years ago at least. And it's a really kind of fun idea. But realizing like, oh, these very specific situations can elicit such intense feelings from people. And to please, like, when you hear somebody being honest about their reactions, to please respect what they're saying and understand that they are experiencing something that's intense and probably giving them very severe physical or psychological reactions as well. Like they said, there are a lot of physiological symptoms like sweating, bloating, lightheadedness, rapid heart rate, and then maybe even like becoming nauseous, turning bright red. There's a whole lot of things that can be going on, and that it is something that you can work on slowly over time. But that definitely is a real thing that a lot of people struggle with.
Yeah, and I love that you pointed that out as the different severity, and also knowing that what people are showing on the outside does not mean what is actually going on the inside, because this is something I'm working so heavily on. When I said I can't relate to the not being scared of making phone calls, that was a little bit of a joke because I'm terrified of making phone calls. And so lately when I need to make a phone call, I've just been picking up a phone and calling. And that way I don't psych myself out. That way I don't build up the stress and the worry about what am I going to do? What am I going to say? What do I like? I don't want to sound stupid and I don't know what I'm doing. So I just pick it up and do it. And so for a lot of people, they could see that and say, oh, wow, she's really good at making phone calls. She just picks up the phone and makes a phone call. But it is terrifying. It's awful. I'm having severe anxiety. However, it's my way of coping with it, but it's also my way of getting over it. Because as I do CBT therapy, and so much of that is exposure and just doing things in order to, in order to lessen that anxiety. So also anxiety is different for all, social anxiety presents itself in different ways, but also a lot of people are working on their anxiety and it still is a lot. I was over in Canada this past week. I don't know, I said over, it's kind of up. I was in another country. I was in Canada this past weekend and I was doing really well talking to people. And then finally by Sunday afternoon, I was like, Mom, can you just start talking to people for me? Because I've been trying to get out of my comfort zone and talk to people and get things done. But at one point I just need to stop because I have put myself out of my comfort zone so many times that I just need to stop and take a step back and say, okay, I've done it. And guess what? Like if you are working on something and you are trying so hard and then you do need to take a break, say you're having a really hard time making phone calls and you need to take a break and I need someone else to make this doctor's appointment for you. Or I need someone else to make this phone call. You're still doing amazing. Mm-hmm. It's going to take time. It's going to take work. And just because you might have a little, or maybe you've been working really hard on going to outings with your friends and then one day you just aren't in the mental health space, you're very burnt out and you can't do it. You're doing great. You're doing well. You're not failing just because you have a little bit of it's not even a step back. It's just a moment you're listening to your body and you need that space. So I think it's really important to give other people grace and realize you have no idea what's going on. I mean, in all senses of anything, but with this, you don't, just because someone might be talkative or somebody might be able to do things that, you think you couldn't do, doesn't mean inside they're not freaking out and on the verge of a panic attack. And so I think it's important, but I also think it's important to give others grace and to give yourself grace as well. Regarding that. And also, too, not comparing yourself with, I've heard a lot from my friends who do this with their anxiety and like, well, just, I can still leave my house. I can still go talk to people. So my social anxiety can't be that bad. But that's it comes in different levels. And if it affects you, it affects you. It doesn't matter how bad it is. It doesn't matter if it's better than other people's or worse than, like, all that matters is if it's affecting you and you want, to do something about it, and then it's worth it. It's worth you changing things up and working hard on it.
Yeah, and there are a few different ways that are generally accepted as good ideas for helping treat social anxiety or social phobia. So the first is CBT, which we talked about earlier. It's a very common type of therapy. It helps with managing anxiety and replacing negative thoughts with positive thoughts. So it's a lot of thought mapping. Acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, is mindfulness, acceptance, and behavioral strategies so that you're more present and you can figure out how to live a value-based life despite these negative feelings that are ongoing. You can also try support groups and group therapy. So this can help with social skills as well as techniques to interact with other people in social settings. And I think for social anxiety, that can be a really empowering thing to be with a group of people who have similar issues ongoing and be able to find support and kind of going through that together. And like Devon said, exposure therapy. So this is working with a healthcare professional to help you gradually face social situations rather than avoiding them. And then, of course, there are medications too that some people use. But there are also other things that you can do. We've got breathing exercises.
Those are wonderful. I can't talk about how the benefits of breathing with more enough. I'm gonna say this, I can't talk about the benefits of breathing enough. Like it's completely changed everything. It
really helps. And then mindfulness, meditation, exercises like yoga and Tai Chi, which can help manage stress, avoiding caffeine and other stimulants, establishing regular sleep routine, having good sleep hygiene. Which,
shout out to our sleep hygiene podcast starring Hannah and our special guest.
Learning about anxiety and its effects. So learning more about it, I think, can be really empowering in overcoming some of these feelings, or at least like understanding them and addressing them. Getting regular exercise, eating a balanced diet to just have an overall sense of well-being, and then talking to someone you trust to find help, to find resources, to get support. I think those are all really helpful ways that you can address stress and minimize anxiety.
Yeah, no, I think that's wonderful. I think that having support, I know I'm very lucky with the support I have in my life, but I think being able to have it, one person that you really support, that really supports you and that you trust, to be able to just kind of open up to them and let them know. And in situations as I was in this weekend, having someone where, they're able to help you if you need that support, you need that break. Sometimes I'll just have someone come with me to the store. Just to have, I'll still do the talking, I'll still do the work, but just to have that moral support is really helpful. And I think that is a huge thing, is if you're able to have someone that you trust and that you feel comfortable opening up to them, and just making sure that you are able to be honest and open. And it's really hard. I have a really hard time asking for help and leaning on people, but community and support is so incredible, and it's so amazing for all mental health. But I think having those people you feel safe with can really, really benefit social anxiety and working through it.
Yeah. And so one more kind of thing that I thought would be interesting to talk about in this episode is the effect that the pandemic had on social anxiety. So there was a really interesting piece written, research done. We'll include the link to the article on NCBI. I think it's wonderful. It's really interesting. It's the influence of COVID-19 pandemic on social anxiety, a systematic review. And so that went over kind of a whole lot of different research that had been done and compiled it and looked at the results of the overall shift in mental health impacts relating to social anxiety post-pandemic in quotations. So one interesting thing is a quote, the results suggest that social anxiety has been heightened in the general population due to the pandemic, previously at 7%. That's not from a quotation, that's just from other information that we have, with women and low-income earners being especially vulnerable. Now, other contributing factors include impaired coping strategies, lower socioeconomic well-being, emotional well-being, limited support networks, and contraction of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which I thought was really interesting. You just see these people who are marginalized, more at risk, less likely to be able to have those safety networks, less likely to be able to have some separation during this really overwhelming time. So maybe a lot of frontline workers who are still having to work, but not getting that kind of support that they were and just doing it in a much more isolated way. I thought that was really compelling. And then there was so the New York Times did an article in 2021 that I found really interesting. So across the world, globally, we're seeing an increase in social anxiety as a trend for younger adults in particular. And that was really amplified by the effects of the pandemic, intensified through months of isolation and fuels social withdrawal and entrenches reclusive habits. I just love that sentence.
I do too. That's awesome.
It's a great one. And I had this quote from a woman, Navandria Page, 25, for the New York Times that I thought really encompassed that issue of coming out of the pandemic with strong social anxiety. Well, I was alone throughout the pandemic, and I think that feeling of loneliness followed me despite being able to go out again. So we're still looking at anticipated greater rates for depression, which is already affecting 13% of adults, ages 18 to 25 too back then. It's just, we're seeing an increase. And I think it's really important for us to see an increase in understanding of this disorder as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I think it's one, everyone can pretty much relate to, of how much it's really shaped and changed our lives and still is shaping and changing our ability to be social quite often.
Yeah.
Do you want to do fun facts?
Oh, one thing I will add.
Yeah, you go for it.
Sorry.
You're okay. We got a little thrown off. So
for people who are interested, there is a MAP, M-A-P, through Anxiety Canada that I thought was interesting. It is My Anxiety Plan, and it might be helpful to those with mild to moderate anxiety. And I thought it was an interesting tool. That's something that you could go through. We'll have that in the show notes. And then any of the statistics that we talked about are listed in our biblio. So please go to the show notes if you're interested in any of those articles.
Thank you. Did you prepare your fun fact?
Of course I did.
Same. I did so much thinking about it.
Yeah.
Here, I just thought of one. Do you want me to go? Okay, cool. So I was talking to someone earlier today, and I realized a lot of people don't know that I used to figure skate. So I started as a teenager, so I wasn't like going to the Olympics by any means, but I can jump and spin. And I really love being on the ice, and I wish I was able to be on there more. But I really love figure skating, and I really love skating. That's my fun fact.
My fun fact is I am a member of the House Rabbit Society.
Love that.
I have a lot of house rabbits. I'm really into rabbits. I'm a lagomorph lover. If you have any questions about being a house rabbit owner or supporting rescue rabbits, please reach out to Hannah at the Helpline.
I love that. That's a wonderful service.
It's a great, I love the House Rabbit Society is a wonderful resource.
That's so cool. I didn't know that was a thing.
It's wonderful.
Reminds me of like Game of Thrones or Hunger Games, the House of Rabbits.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's very metal like that too.
I love it.
Because bunnies are probably like the most metal pet.
Oh, 100%.
They're really hardcore.
100%.
Super cool. They're like 2 pounds. They're just pure adrenaline. Just like,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they're tough. Love them.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today. And stay tuned for some other amazing podcasts coming up. And have a lovely, wonderful day.
Yes. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.